to the second event in our IdeaSpies Conversation Series. I'm Lynn Wood, the Chief Idea Spy and the founder of IdeaSpies. Before we begin today, I'd like to acknowledge the Bidjigal and Gadigal peoples of the Aurora Nation, who are the traditional owners of the lands from which I'm joining, and to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So thank you everyone for joining us today. In this event, we'll be discussing the opportunities for nuclear energy in Australia. And you can find lots of ideas on this topic on the IdeaSpies platform by typing nuclear into the search bar. This event is a collaboration between IdeaSpies and the RSA. And for those of you who weren't aware, the RSA, like IdeaSpies, is a global community of innovators and change makers committed to a future that is resilient, rebalanced, and regenerative. I'm joined today by our IdeaSpies Industrial Editor, Michael Sharpe, who will be our keynote speaker for this event. Michael is an advocate for the future of energy in Australia and is the founder of the Nuclear Capabilities Forum, which includes leading industrial companies and researchers to boost Australian capabilities to manufacture and gain access to global supply chains in the nuclear industry. And we also have Philippa Duthie, Director of the RSA's Oceania Network, who will be moderating the discussion after the presentation. But for now, let me hand over to Michael. Thank you, Michael.
Oh, good on you, Lynn. Great to be here and good to be amongst friends too. So those IdeaSpies shirts are looking great, I must say. Nuclear, it's today I'm in Melbourne. I'm here for the Avalon Air Show, which is a major defence exhibit in Australia. It's the first time in 4 years due to COVID lockdowns and all the rest, but there's a whole contingent from right around the world here to talk about defence issues and naturally aircraft, and there's plenty of F-35s and a variety of aircraft on display. But a big topic is AUKUS and the new, what they term the forever partnership between Australia, the UK and the US. And AUKUS has changed the subject around nuclear in so many ways, so innovation's playing a key role. But 2 years ago, I formed the Nuclear Skills Forum, and we had Australian manufacturers wanting to be involved and see how nuclear energy plays around the world and how Australia could be a part of that. Currently, for many years, Australia has banned nuclear energy. So there's 2 federal government laws that ban nuclear power in Australia. But that doesn't stop our companies from using their world-class resources and capabilities to join global supply chains. And so we've been able to connect with companies like Rolls-Royce out of the UK and talk about their small modular reactor technology. We've also engaged with NuScale Power out of Seattle, again with their SMRs, and they're the first company to get regulation approval in the US. So there's a lot of innovation going on right now around nuclear power, and it just makes sense to me that we should all be a part of that. So IdeaSpies, the platform, plays a key role in the communications of good ideas that do good. So maybe, Lynn, we could share the screen because there's some great ideas I'd love to share with everyone. It's a really simple platform. You just go to the search bar there, and perhaps first off, Lynn, we type in nuclear fuel, because the reason I raise this is whenever I talk about nuclear for power, the first thing people say to me is, oh, what about the waste? And yet there's so much innovation going on now around nuclear fuel recycling. And so if you have a look there, there's quite a few articles, but spent nuclear fuel recycling, there it is. And other ideas with nuclear there for space and so much more. It's going on. But the ideas are there, so that the links to information are there available to anyone in the public. So feel free to share these ideas. And if people talked about the nuclear fuel cycle, you can have some information at hand to be able to share about all the great innovations that are going on right around the world right now that we can all benefit from. Lynn, you know this, but one of the things I say to people is that only 15 years ago, the iPhone did not exist. People were concerned about the iPod before the telephone and a new platform called iTunes. And we were all wondering if we would spend 3 or 5 cents on downloading a song to this mobile device. And yet here we are, 15 years on with the iPhone, latest technology. Think about the skills. There was no such job as an app developer. And yet now we've got some fantastic new minds working in that space globally. So you can never say never anymore, and technology keeps shifting, and so it does with nuclear as well. The Tesla motor car didn't exist 12 years ago. The first ones came off the assembly line. So think about that and how much, you know, these electric vehicles are changing the dynamics. And then I'm sure we can all relate that only 3 years ago, and it seems remarkable that it is 3 years, but COVID hit us. And for me personally, I had never heard of Zoom only 3 years ago, and yet here we are. We treat it as normal now. And it doesn't matter where in the world I am. I can be in the car, what I like to call the mobile Zoom studio, and communicate to the world. So here we are. Technology does not stand still, and it certainly doesn't do that with nuclear. So the first small modular reactors that Rolls-Royce described to me were in the nuclear submarine fleet, and that's over 60 years ago. So think about 60 years ago, the sort of cars we had were in Australia, the likes of the FJ Holden, or maybe the old Vauxhalls in the UK, and the Oldsmobiles in the US. And now we have the Tesla electric vehicle. So you can see how things change, and so it does with the nuclear industry as well, because nuclear is so much more than just energy. But I know today we're spending time on nuclear power. So perhaps, Lynn, we go and search on the bar around fusion. And if you just put in the word fusion, you'll see some of the latest news going on with this topic. And because industry itself does not stand still, and with nuclear, that's the same. So you'll see here about revolutionising the energy with advanced fusion. And there's so much talk in Australia. We have the relatively new Australian Space Agency. So Australia has a big focus on space now, and we're a signatory to the NASA Moon to Mars mission. And so there's a lot of work going on around fusion energy and what that looks like for producing power on the moon and potentially in Mars. But then it goes on to so much more. So these ideas are there for everyone to share. If you're looking, for information to educate yourself, go for it. If you want to share this information with friends, you can copy the link and text it to them on your iPhone. It's as simple as that. But this is where we post the latest information around the whole industry. And for Australia, it's about getting manufacturing companies involved in these global supply chains, and that will help us to create higher skilled jobs, upskill the workforce for the next generation. And we certainly need to get more people involved in manufacturing, that's for sure. If we just go to nuclear power, Lynn, there's some great ones there around just nuclear power itself. And you can see that you can just use these words and it comes up with the various ideas. So you can see there, Rolls-Royce are now talking about galactic nuclear engines. And this is using nuclear research and then commercializing it into real world technology to be able to go from the moon to Mars, and who knows where from there. As I said earlier, you can never say never anymore. We live in amazing times. But to today's world, look at these skills that we're learning and embarking on. And we know that from space, we've had technologies come out of the space race, like simple things like, well, we say simple, but Velcro and other products that have come out of the space race. So I reckon we ain't seen nothing yet. But you can see there's plenty of ideas there around nuclear power in so many different forms. And this is what's happening today. This is research in action. Researchers from universities around the world connecting with industry in Australia, the United Kingdom and the US and many other places, but then commercializing this technology to, I know there's work going on with companies out of the US to supply new energy sources to countries like Poland, for example. So who wouldn't want to be part of these global supply chains, because more and more we're interdependent. And so we have these great opportunities for doing so much more. Plenty of ideas, as you can see, but if we go to another word, Lynn, if you don't mind, if you put in propulsion, because as I said, I'm down here for the Avalon Air Show, and naturally that's around defense and the broader Air Force and others. But right now we're waiting, and it's only a few weeks away, that we'll have the Prime Minister of the UK and the Australian Prime Minister visiting the White House to talk with President Biden. And the three of those world leaders will make the announcement of the optimal pathway for the nuclear submarine fleet in Australia. So nuclear propulsion, of course, is a hot topic. And submarines, yes, but also for space. So it's exciting. Who would have thought? And yet here we are. And there's plenty of ideas there, real world research that's happening today. and also commercializing that research into action for today and for the very few years to come. Some great stories there about Australian companies leading the world in commercializing this technology. And we're not just talking about startup companies, we're talking about existing former heavy engineering firms that are now transitioning into adjacent markets to use their capabilities and their workforce to upskill and invest in new equipment to do new things and to sustain their company. So this also gets very interesting for a country like Australia, where we can transform industry and create these jobs of tomorrow, sustaining Australia's capabilities for the world. So this is why, for me personally, I get really excited about it. It was great to talk to so many different people last night at this event for the UK Embassy. It was also interesting to me that we had the Ukrainian ambassador to Australia in the room, and I had a great conversation with him. And all the talk was about bushmasters, which are made here locally in Victoria and are currently being sent to Ukraine for their support. So there's a lot of good work going on. You can see here from the IdeaSpies platform, there's a great lot of ideas that, as Lynn very rightly says, ideas that do good. So great to be a part of it. We've got a great cohort at IdeaSpies. It is good to be amongst friends and good to see so many familiar faces here this morning. But happy to take any questions, and great to join you all.
Thank you very much, Michael. And that's now we'd like to go on to discussion, and you'll be handling the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lynn. My name is Philippa Duffy, and I'm the director of RSA Oceania, as Lynn mentioned earlier. And before I begin my section, I'd just like to acknowledge the Gubbi Gubbi and Turrbal people as the traditional owners of the land on which I'm joining. So I can see a few questions have come through, but please, if you have any questions for Michael in the chat after that really interesting discussion, please, now is the time to post and share. But I'm just going to kick us off with a question from Jeremy, which is which companies, and you mentioned Rolls-Royce, for example, should set up in Australia to further the nuclear energy industry?
Yeah, so in my mind, it's broad, and then we can focus down from that. But if you think about nuclear industry in general, and Tim understands this well out at ANSTO, we've got people doing world-class work, research and commercialization in medtech with nuclear technologies. We've got companies doing things in food and agriculture work using nuclear technologies. Australia has such an opportunity with agriculture. I think we need a much larger vision for what Australia can do with agriculture. And I have no doubt that nuclear can play a part in quite a few ways. Here in Australia, we've got the Minerals Council, the Australian Minerals Council, are an advocate for small modular reactor technology in the mining space to set up power in remote areas to power mining of critical minerals and other needs. So we need these critical minerals more than ever. The mining sector is growing in Australia, and I'm talking much more than just uranium, which we're already a major exporter of. But if we can tap into this new opportunity, I've got no doubt it can support Australia for generations to come. Rolls-Royce, yeah, they're already here in Australia. I've got companies in Sydney that are now engaged with Rolls' engineering team in Germany. So using Australian technology to be part of a global supply chain. I think we're going to see more of that. There's a lot of energetic people involved, but we need to get this message out to a broader audience, which is part of what we're doing today. But if we can get more Australian companies collaborating together, I think we can get a larger voice out to the global industry to say we're here and we're willing to play a part. And that's why companies like NewScale were able to zoom in from Seattle and say, hey, if you've got the technology, we want to hear from you.
Thanks, Michael. I can't see any more questions come through just yet, but I do have one that I'd like to ask you. And you mentioned it at the start, which was around the safety of nuclear energy. So I think a lot of people, like you said, have that barrier of, community safety, but also environmental safety when they hear the word nuclear. So I know you've shared with us a lot of really interesting ideas around minimizing the risk to people and to communities and to the land that sustains us. But how can we guarantee in the long run that this energy is a safe option for us in the long term?
Yeah, and as part of the race to net zero that we're all on, this green renewable energy, nuclear needs to be a part of that mix. I'm doing a lot of work in the hydrogen and renewable energy space, which is also great. We have plenty of sun and wind here in Australia, which is terrific. But for the energy mix moving forward, nuclear should be part of that conversation. And if you look, perhaps Lynn, if you pull up, maybe it's nuclear power again, but just last week, Canada have announced that GE Hitachi have signed a contract to build the first GE Hitachi small modular reactor for North America. And so if you have a look at the photograph of the design, you'll see it's not the sort of, that's it there on the, so see the GE Hitachi. That's the design that they're going to build for the first one in North America. That's just last week. So you can see it's not like what you might see on The Simpsons with the big exhaust stacks and so much more that people think about nuclear. I encourage people to think differently about how technology changes, as I mentioned earlier. And the latest technology is what you've seen there in front of you with the GE Hitachi model. Other companies like TerraPower, Rolls-Royce, NewScale are on this same journey. So as we speak, there's research around the world about new technologies for nuclear. And I have no doubt that safety is the key priority because everyone wants this industry to be sustainable. And so that's the latest that you can see there.
Tim, you might want to comment on the safety angle.
Yeah, so I think it's one of those things where safety is tasked to risk. So if I say that if you're going to hop on an airplane and travel to the US tomorrow, there is a small probability that you won't get off the plane at the other end. It won't make it there, but it doesn't stop you from going on the plane. And all engineering works this way, that you try to engineer risks out to create a safe environment. And the nuclear industry is the most highly regulated industry in the world. Everything has got triple redundancies. The safety cases are ironclad, and it goes beyond the Swiss cheese model of safety, which is where you've got to go through multiple small holes to get to a catastrophic position or to realize a risk, into having safety design as part of the core feature of the design. So I think it's one of those situations where the risk is managed, and as a safety, as technology is the precursor to safety. As Sharpe said earlier, you look at the generation of reactors that all the problems were early generation reactors that were designed in the late 50s. If you look at the modern reactors and the technology in there, and the car from the modern car, it's chalk and cheese in terms of technology, efficiency, and safety. And when you compare it to other technologies such as hydrogen, hydrogen also has a history of not being safe. It's still not safe, but that seems to be where the debate is pushing energy. And hydrogen is a poor battery technology. I won't go down that path, but I think we need to remove our prejudices if we want to consider what best use energy practice looks like in the future. I believe it will be a mixture of different energy technologies, but nuclear has its role in there. Although as an Australian, we can't actually do much in terms of nuclear power, but the nuclear industry is much beyond power.
Someone has their hand up there.
I was just going to say, Stuart, did you want to come in, and then we'll go to Jeremy's question?
Yeah, thank you. And it builds on both of your points, Michael and Tim. I want to make an analogy with the minerals industry more broadly. So we get iron on the ground and we ship it overseas. We get bauxite out of the ground, we ship it over the seas. I'd love to know what we do with uranium right now, and then are the first steps into taking a bigger slice of this, adding more value to the processing? How do we move up the stack, granting that the likelihood of getting a nuclear power industry away in Australia is minimum 15 years away if there was the social acceptance of it?
And Tim might have some more insights into the uranium fuel cycle, but it was interesting for me that I pulled out a school project book from when I was in primary school, and it was about the nuclear fuel cycle. And then there was a whole policy change and government laws and regulations change that they stopped teaching nuclear in schools. And so I think we've skipped a generation there, and I think we've got some catching up to do. But maybe over to you, Tim, around the uranium side.
Yeah, I think Australia has the privilege of having some of the largest uranium deposits in the world. South Australia particularly has the most energy resource intensive land of anywhere in the world, but also has the privilege of paying the highest energy costs of anywhere in the world and having the most unreliable supply, or one of the most unreliable supply for a developed nation. So when you factor this in, the uranium, we dig it up, we process it into yellow cake, and get shipped elsewhere for value-added manufacturing into fuel plates, cladding, and other various products that uranium is used for in the nuclear fuel cycle. And I think that where the opportunity is lost is we need to consider that nuclear fuel cycle is a circular economy. That we think of it as something we burn and it's fuel and then becomes waste, and that's a problem. But it's an opportunity because there's the new reactor design, especially those by TerraPower, which is Intellectual Ventures spin-off technology. That reaction technology uses waste from previous generation reactors as the fuel source. And then from that you create flux, and then from that flux you can do things like create nuclear medicine and do science and all research and other value-added activities. We tend to think of it as a closed system where we dig uranium up, we ship it overseas, someone else creates the value. We buy the plates back at probably tens of thousands of the cost of the original material. And then we burn it and we ship it back to France, some reprocessing. It gets encased in glass, then sent back somewhere for long-term storage, which is currently in the middle of Sydney. But that's a different discussion. So we need to be smarter in our approach to technology. The technologies that will get us to clean energy and net zero, they exist today, but we need to depolitify, take the politics out of the technology, because that's part of the problem. We'll talk about green hydrogen, which is hopium, because it doesn't exist at scale. And also hydrogen is, I will say that my big bugbear of hydrogen is that it uses energy to produce. That energy is electricity, could be used to power batteries directly, or directly feed into the grid. So we produce hydrogen with that, or you can produce hydrogen through dirty fuels, through fossil fuel reforming, which is worse for the environment. It's got very, very limited energy density. It's not very good for combustion. It's dangerous to transport. It's a large footprint to transport it, and then people want to either combust it or use a fuel cell to convert it to electricity in the end, which as a battery is about 30% efficiency, which is probably the worst efficiency of any modern technology that we're looking at for clean energy. The other one is the thermodynamics of converting it to ammonia, and then using ammonia as a fuel, or splitting ammonia back into hydrogen to use as a fuel, is even crazier. Or then even worse is taking a toxic gas as a fuel and then using it as a co-combustant in other combustible technologies, where you actually then put toxic emissions into the atmosphere as well. So it's just crazy. And I think when we start to decouple the politics from the technology, and I say it's not as an ANSTO employee, but just as a interested person in the community, we'll start to have proper discussion around what the net zero energy future looks like.
Yep, and to Jeremy's point around with Japan, that's coming down and happening. I believe there's a body of work there, and the various world organizations and regulations are saying that it's safe and ready to do. Unfortunately, it's necessary. But again, technology doesn't stand still. So the new technology coming towards us is where we're focused on. And again, this is I see as an opportunity for a skills uplift here in Australia to be part of this new technology, because the world is racing towards 2050. It's not that far away. They say we don't have another chance after that. And so if we're going to reduce emissions, I strongly believe that nuclear has to be part of that mix with zero emissions technology. You know, if you look at the coal-fired power stations that are still being built today in other countries around the world, you've got massive ash dams that come with that. So the waste out of coal. You've got technologies like the wind and solar farms that currently, as I understand, there's no technology to recycle solar panels. And so I know there's research going on here in Australia to look at recycling those solar panels, which have a lifespan of just 20 years. So there's waste in no matter what we do, but technology is coming down the line here in Australia and other countries, but Australia is leading in so many ways to look at recycling and create this circular economy, which will set up Australia for a long opportunity down the path to export manufactured goods around the world. If we can use green renewable energies to produce goods here in Australia, we can export to the EU markets and others with a big green tick beside it to say, you know, made with renewable energy. And I think that's a plus that we should all be aiming for.
Yeah, I've got to roll off, Sharpe, but I see Jeremy Wright's put a comment in around the Fukushima holdover water. So that's decontaminated water. It has the radioactive source in there is tritium, which is a hydrogen with 3 neutrons. And that when we're talking about release, by the time they spread that out across the Pacific, the radioactive effects to the environment is negligible, because we're diluting it down by factors of trillions or multiple trillions. So it won't actually have impact on the environment like we think it would. It's not like we're dumping heavy metal, actinide waste into the sea. It's just water with heavy iron that has that is slowly decaying. There is an always an environmental impact and the cause and effect for everything, but it's not in this case it's not catastrophic. The other thing around the mixed energy debate, which Robert puts in his comment, is that we keep on looking at battery technologies and lithium as a battery technology. There's not enough lithium in the world at the moment to replace every vehicle to be an electric vehicle, and we'll destroy the planet looking for it. So electric vehicles aren't the solution either. But I don't know what there's alternative battery technologies that are better. We just need to be more mindful that electric vehicles are great and they're less emitting, and you put all your emissions into the bulk power generation in coal-fired power stations, but we can't use lithium technology to solve all the problems. Yeah.
Thanks, Tim. And this is Mike. Thanks for joining us. And to Tim's point, this is my experience that sometimes you just need to say the word nuclear and people start wondering what's next. But this is exactly why we're here today, and this is why the IdeaSpies platform is such a strength to put these messages out there where we can share the latest and we can learn together, ask questions of each other, but move forward. And this is the opportunity.
Thanks, Michael. We might move on to Robert's question then around energy policy. So he says that electricity energy policies are focused on renewables as the solution. Do you think there should be broader community debate around this to overturn the bans that you mentioned and highlight the federal MPs, Friends of Nuclear Industries advocacy for nuclear in the supply system?
I must say, it does seem strange to me that we've got countries around the world like Kazakhstan, that are on the path to building small modular reactors. And yet in Australia, we can't even have the debate. So I think there's opportunities there to broaden that discussion, no doubt. This platform can play a key role in that by sharing these ideas. But who wouldn't want to be part of a upskilling of the Australian workforce? That's why my efforts have been to access global supply chains where we can help other countries on that journey, but helping Australian manufacturers to be part of that supply chain and use Australian technology to play a part. I have no doubt that we're going to have to head towards nuclear here in Australia, because if we're going to meet these targets that we've committed to, it's going to have to be part of the mix.
Thank you, Michael. I might open it up to the floor then and see if anyone has any questions they want to ask directly or any comments that they want to make.
Yeah,
Yes.
I sent you. Yeah.
Well, Michael, it's Rob Masters. I noticed where Canada has just given money towards the building of a modular nuclear reactor. How many years away would a modular nuclear reactor be for it to come into operation?
Yeah, it's good question. And when I first had the nuclear skills forum I mentioned earlier, our first meeting was with Rolls-Royce, who zoomed in from the UK. And at that meeting, they described the work they've been doing and designing the SMR. And they were hopeful that the UK government would put an order in and that they could actually start this commercialisation journey. The interesting part for me was the following month, they got the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, signed off on, I believe it was 16 SMRs for the UK market. So they're on that journey. And I've been able to connect Australian companies to talk with Rolls-Royce as part of being that supply chain. My understanding is that that's within the next 10 years. So it's coming at us very fast. If you think back, that again, the iPhone didn't exist 15 years ago. So things are moving fast. We're all using more energy than ever before, and that's not going to slow down. I think the opportunities are right here now for Australia. The nuclear submarines has been the game changer as far as the discussion and people asking more questions about the nuclear industry. And so my work is getting people involved and connected and thinking about their business as far as they might be currently in the heavy engineering market, but they could possibly get involved with the nuclear industry and broaden their capabilities, broaden their business strengths to help make that company sustainable. So it gets pretty interesting.
Thanks, Michael. I might actually come back to Jeremy because I also wasn't satisfied with Tim's answer and I also have queries. So I'm going to invite Jeremy in to just speak about that, the release of the wastewater into around the Pacific Islands at the moment. Jeremy, did you want to come in?
Look, thank you. I appreciate it. I guess, Tim, I can understand how it might be diluted, but it's the cumulative effect of all our technologies that really make the world worse off. And I worry about that wherever it is and whatever it is. But I take your point; it gets diluted. But around Fukushima, there's been leaks apparently for the last sort of 7 and 8 years that have been pretty heavy already. So it's cumulative on top of leaks already. And how do we manage disasters? How do we manage bad weather and disasters that affect nuclear situations that are out of our control? Not that are within our control in terms of safety measures, but are without our control. They tend to be a little bit more disastrous than simply a coal-fired power station, being put out of action. I guess that was my concern. Let me say I appreciate the discussion and Michael's presentation is terrific. Thank you. I think there are these caveats that we've really got to watch out for.
No, and Jeremy, I think you're right to be concerned, and it's a good question. You're hearing it a lot, but my experience is that once you get people involved, and here we are today, so talking about this, and so that raises the discussion, doesn't it? And so you've got people like Tim who are at ANSTO and can spread that message and communicate your concerns to a broader audience. And together we learn more. Together we have these new technologies like SMRs that didn't exist 10 years ago. So technology keeps moving forward. We certainly do have this race to 2050 that the scientists tell us we need to meet or beat. So I can't see us doing that at this rate without nuclear being part of that mix. That's what I'm hearing and learning from talking with people across industry. If it's already being built, these technologies are coming online for other countries, I think Australia should be part of that mix. That's my comment to the debate. I've seen these ash dams at the coal-fired power plants. I don't know what the outcome are from that. There's been technology around trying to recycle that ash into things like superheating it and condensing it into bricks, a whole thing like that. So we can talk. Yeah, that's right. So I guess it doesn't matter what we do as humans. There is waste. The circular economy. We probably didn't even hear that terminology only 5 years ago. So the circular economy has become more and more talked about. So the opportunities are growing. But I think your comments are good because it drives that conversation to the people like NewScale and Rolls-Royce and TerraPower to say we can do better with the right investments and the right industry partners to commercialize it. We'll make it better, and that'll help us on this race to 2050.
And could I add to a response? Thank you. Jeremy, I think it would be really worthwhile to go out to ANSTO. As you know, Jeremy Ungar, Maddie Cunningham, and I went out to ANSTO. You do a terrific tour out there. And I asked the question, the similar question to what you're asking about Fukushima. And as I understand it, the answer was they had that terrible weather event. They had backup batteries. The backup batteries didn't work because they had to keep it running. But what they lacked that ANSTO has is automatic shutdown. So I really encourage anybody who's interested in this topic to go out to ANSTO and ask these questions, because they are questions that need to be answered if we're to move forward in this industry. And that's, again, why we're having this debate. And thanks to everybody who has joined it.
Thanks.
Yeah, and it's great to get those questions from Jeremy because that's what drives this conversation, and it's going to drive the technology forward as well. We can do better.
Thanks, Michael. I'm just going to bring Stuart in now to ask his question.
It's maybe a couple of comments, if I could, Philippa, and this is great discussion. I'm going to applaud South Australia, first of all, who had the who were brave enough to hold the commission into the nuclear fuel cycle. You know, they've at least pushed that envelope. But having spent 5 years in Canberra, I don't see any politician wasting any political capital on any domestic nuclear industry, in nuclear energy industry. And I want to be very, very clear about that, because I think this is all about social license to operate. And I think the way forward is actually to assist other countries in the world to decarbonize. And that actually wraps up Jeremy's point. You know, the safety systems at Fukushima, some of the generators were underwater, the backups. Some of the fuel was stored at Fukushima because they had no long-term storage for it, something that Finns have solved. But if we turn our mindset to applying the great manufacturing, the great safety systems, the great regulatory, and the great sources of nuclear energy that we have in Australia, if we apply them to helping the rest of the world decarbonize, I think we will capture that political goodwill, because it will be part of trade and security pacts, particularly with our friends to the north, for which solar in particular is really just not an answer because they don't have the climate for it. So I think that's got to be a way that we focus. It's technology working with trade and working with political structures internationally. My quick back of envelope, and I'll stop my tirade. My back of envelope was, if the global nuclear fleet was decommissioned, which at one point ideologically we were going down that path, we would need 5 more. We would create 5 more Australias in greenhouse gas emissions, because it will not be replaced by renewables. So the answers to me are around looking abroad and solving their problems using our great nuclear capabilities and building on that, rather than to run a debate that will take 20 years and not conclude about a domestic energy industry. But I'll leave it at that.
No, thanks, Stuart. And I want to add to that, because beyond nuclear power, I touched on earlier about what's going on in space. And so as Australia is a signatory to the NASA Moon to Mars mission, we're part of this process to build energy plants on the moon. I'm told that within the next decade, we'll have 1,000 people living on the moon to build and sustain the base for the launch pads to get to Mars. So if we're going to have people living and working on the moon, they need energy. And as I understand it, nuclear is part of that mix. And there's there is articles about that on the IdeaSpies platform. But my point is, I want Australia to be part of that. And I want our kids to be part of this engineering experience to make world-class products, or you could say products that are out of this world. But we do live in a time where you can never say never anymore. And so there's going to be so much work going on for nuclear engineering here in Australia. to meet our requirements with the nuclear submarines. But there's a whole industry that backs that up. So manufacturing in general, so companies that can do robotics welding, companies that are doing the electrical work, it goes on and on. But these are the skills that will be lifted here in Australia, and who wouldn't want to be part of that? So that's what I get interested in, is moving all this technology forward, and I want Australia to be part of that mix.
Thank you, Michael. Any other questions from anyone? Or comments, or anything you want to reflect on that you've just heard? No? Okay, I have a rather left field comment, which I can bring in now if the time is right. A couple of years ago, we ran a series of events around long-term thinking, and one of our guests was Vincent Iolenti, who's an anthropologist. He has worked with Finland. He did his PhD, I think, on the Finland waste repository, and as a social anthropologist, he was really interested in how we communicate that concept of, of nuclear waste being something that will be dangerous for the long term to future generations with the evolution of language. So basically, apparently there was a real issue in terms of how, with the changing language, changing, ways that we communicate as a species, how do we communicate to future generations, thousands of years in the future, that this is still radioactive material? And this was something apparently that the safety case experts had to literally grapple with, just in the event of people digging down into the earth and finding these repositories. So I wanted to see if you had any thoughts around that, particularly if we're looking at, storing waste in Australia, for example, or in other areas, and whether that's even a consideration, or it's just something that is an interesting anecdote to bring up.
Yeah, sure. If it isn't part of the conversation, it needs to be. But there's IdeaSpies articles there about recycling nuclear fuels. So these are happening right now. And that means that, I'm sure there'll be pathways to recycling fuel that's been stored. So this is the opportunity. If I think in engineering in general, it's only 70 years ago that the US highway network was built. And it's a whole network of concrete pavements right across the US highway system. They never thought about what happens when it starts breaking down. And here we are 70 years later, where there's cracks and potholes and all the rest that go into concrete pavements. And rather than having to dig it all up, there's technology that's come along to actually what they call rubberize the concrete pavement. So a vehicle can go along and actually ram down on that concrete and break it up and fracture it and turn it back into a gravel road base. And then they can put asphalt over the top of it. The reason I raise that is because that's my world. I understand roadworks and construction, and I've seen how technology can play a part to overcome an obstacle, because these cracked pavements, make it hard for vehicles to travel along and can cause accidents and deaths in road accidents. So technology responded. The university researchers played a part. Industry came along and developed new technologies and road equipment to overcome this hazard to our communities. And so we're seeing that now in this high technology field around nuclear. It doesn't get much more technical, but we've got some great minds here in Australia, and we need to leverage that resource and teach more people coming through around what we can do with the nuclear industry. So I know that fuel is being part of that. There is a whole lot of work going on in recycling nuclear fuel, which I didn't know about only 2 years ago. But if we can recycle nuclear fuel, well, that's a game changer as well. So I think that's, as Australians, we should be part of this conversation. If we can spread that message to our politicians, and if we can look at how we can change regulations here in Australia to make it more opportunistic for Australian industry to play a role, I think that will help us as a country. And I have no doubt now with the AUKUS partnership, where we're going to be sharing information across the 3 nations, that we're going to need to play an important role as Australians in that relationship. So this is the opportunity. And again, I think we all want to be part of that.
Thanks, Michael. Any last minute questions? We're 10 minutes from time. So if we
A last minute comment, if I could, Philip, because I spent a bit of time privileged to spend a bit of time in Finland and Japan. And I think it's notable that both are relatively resource poor in terms of natural resources, minerals, etc. And I think there's a much more mature understanding of two things: conservation of materials and energy security. And I think it makes the whole conversation a lot easier. We are cursed by our bounty. We think we can dig holes to get stuff out forever, and we think we can dig holes to throw things away forever. And it makes us, I think it actually makes us politically and intellectually lazy. But that's why I think some of these answers actually lie abroad, where there are greater constraints, and that is the innovation drive often. It's that constraint. You look at places like Singapore, you know, I was told by one of my colleagues a couple of weeks ago, they have a 65 million cubic meters of landfill capacity left, but that's it, right? There is no more space in Singapore to throw things away. So those disciplines are coming elsewhere. We don't have them here yet because we still think that Australia as an infinite continent for throwing stuff away and for extracting minerals as well.
I'll just touch on that. If you think about 100 years ago, what energy transmission was like and what the energy generators must have looked like, and the smokestacks coming out of that must have been horrendous. But we've changed. We've gone with technology. We've made new power plants. We still today use oil and gas and coal, and we've got new technologies around solar panels and wind towers. So technology does keep moving. We want to support other countries too, because we're one planet. You know, Australia has an important role to play, not just in being a good community citizen, but we do have some of the brightest minds in the world here in Australia that can help this journey to new technologies for generating electricity. We're only going to keep using more of it. We all use energy. And so if we can find new ways of generating that electricity, this is the path we want to be on. Not just for Earth, because clearly with Elon Musk and others on their way to making us an interplanetary species, which seems incredible, but it's happening. And so let's be part of that mix.
Thanks, Michael. I might, just as we've got time, I might come back to Stuart's question and ask around, or comment rather, and ask about that linear mindset. And I just wanted to see if either Stuart or yourself, Michael, have any further comments around how we can, bring more circularity into all of our systems, not just the energy system, but as Stuart mentioned, the waste system, all of our design, all of the systems where we design and use materials that are particularly non-renewable materials. How can we embed more of a circular mindset in all that we do?
Oh, sure. I'd like to talk about that, because I see that firsthand by bringing some of these world-leading professors out of our universities and then walking the factory floor with companies here in Australia, and then connecting to global companies like Rolls-Royce and NewScale and others. But in general, if you look at our tips and garbage tips that was mentioned, they're full. It's not just Singapore, but it's in other places. Think about your local garbage tip, and we've got various bins now for helping us to recycle and issues around that. But some of the technology I can share with you is around recycling electronic waste. So I'm sure we all have 2 or 3 or more old telephones in your top kitchen drawer sitting there going to waste. And sometimes you'll just put your old laptop into the garbage bin and you probably don't know where that ends up. But there's technology here in Australia, world's first, for recycling e-waste. So instead of just putting it in a garbage bin and hoping for the best or putting it to landfill, there's been work going on to put all that e-waste into a furnace and try and do what you can there. But the latest work is melting e-waste at various melt points. And so if you think about what your iPhone is made up of, copper, glass, plastic, all the rare earth materials, the critical minerals that go into making up an iPhone, if you can melt them at their various melt points, and then this technology brings those metals out. One of the components is gold. So I'm told that there's 600 mobile telephones to make 1 ton of e-waste. And out of that 1 ton of e-waste, this technology out of Australia produces 300 grams of gold. And so my talk has been that we should make that, market that to the world as a gold making machine, because we can do much better. So rather than just turning e-waste into a black gloop, we can actually extract these waste materials and reuse them. The other thing to think about is that these materials originally have come out of the ground naturally, but they've been graded and refined to be put into all that circuitry that makes up the iPhone. So it's already a higher grade of material, a higher grade of rare earth materials. So we can even save on the mining aspect. If we think about all our kitchen drawers full of mobile phones, if we pull all this e-waste around the world together, we actually have a great mining resource there. So again, this is happening here in Australia. We do have some of these great mines. To your point around the circular economy and recycling waste, it's broad, isn't it? But we do have a lot of waste. In the past, there's been talking about using garbage tips as a source for making fuels and in some form burning the plastics to make it into recycled oils and the like, melt it down and melt the plastics back to an oil. I just think we can do much better than just oil. We can actually recycle that waste into high value products. So this is where, again, technology plays a part. If we can, if I use the e-waste example of melting it at different levels to get their optimum material, well, then we could recycle that into new telephones. So not just recycling in traditional sense, but actually high value capture of the circular economy. And I see, Lynn, you're pulling up some ideas there. So this is good. Again, the IdeaSpies platform has so many ideas that as a community we share, and great to have these conversations where we can come together and share this knowledge bank, but it's there on the platform for everyone to share. And again, if you've got friends or family that are wanting to ask questions about all these topics, you can just pull up an article here and copy and text it to them. It's that simple.
Well, a huge thank you to our keynote speaker, Michael, for his presentation, and to you, Philippa, for moderating the Q&A, and to everyone who has attended and offered so much in terms of questions and answers on these really important topics for the future.